Hey guys, I'm Michelle. Welcome back to my channel. If writing workshops and traditional publishing talk are your thing, please consider subscribing. So today's video is a little bit of a new format for me. On my community tab last week, I asked you guys to ask me any questions you have on writing or publishing because I'd like to start doing Q&A videos maybe once a month. Before we dive into these, I want to say that a few of the questions I got specifically on writing craft, when I started thinking about my response, I kind of realized that these needed to be full workshop videos because I've got a bunch of exercises I can recommend and things like that. So if you ask me a writing craft question and I don't get to it in this video, please know it's because I've got more videos coming just for you. Okay, so the first question comes from Amy. I'd like first paragraph critiques or query critiques or examples of winning or some of your queries that just got you a contract, or how long should one wait after querying a publisher before they move on. I guess it could apply to agents too, but with COVID, who knows now. I don't have any plans for doing critiques right now, although it's definitely something I would consider for the future. But I'm definitely happy to share my query that ended up getting me an agent. I signed with my agent, Sarah Davies, over 10 years ago. And while that book did go to acquisitions at one house, ultimately didn't sell. But here was the query. According to Ruth Pepperton's seance-loving stepmom, Nita, every town has its ghosts, even Frostproof, Florida. But they can't tell you what they need unless you invite them. So Ruth does what any tech-savvy 8th grade girl would do. She starts a blog inviting all of the Frostproof ghosts to tell her their problems. It works better than she planned. Now Ruth is stuck with tons of weird anonymous comments, not to mention troubled spirits messing around in the wiring of the school computers. When she misinterprets a comment and causes a humiliating accident at the Halloween dance, Ruth decides to get this spook thing under control. Organizing them is easy. Monday is for long-lost love laments, Tuesday is family drama, Wednesday and Thursday are revenge and unresolved business, and Fridays for general warnings of impending doom. No blogging on the weekends. Ruth has a life, kind of. But when a few comments warn her of a serious threat to the town's upcoming Frost Festival, Ruth begins to regret getting into the spook business. Nita is trying to help, but she's having enough trouble with ghosts of her own. Now it's Ruth's turn to be the medium, and she needs to figure out what these spirits want before Frostproof's ghost population gets a dangerous increase in traffic. Reading this one now makes me laugh because on one hand, it's a good query. It's got voice, there's conflict, you can see a lot of potential for fun and spooky scenes. But on the other hand, just the phrase, tech-savvy 8th grade girl starts a blog, feels pretty dated. I wrote this query at the end of 2009, guys. Not that blogs don't exist anymore, but you know, it's just a little bit different. As far as how long you should wait to hear back from an agent before you query another, the first book I queried, which ultimately did not get representation, I think I queried in batches of 6 to 8. When I would get a rejection, I would send out another query. And I think if I went more than 2 weeks without hearing from an agent, I would send out another query. The whole no response is a no policy makes this whole process really difficult, both logistically and emotionally, just because you never know if they're ever going to respond. So I think you need to decide for yourself, how long are you willing to wait? For the record, I received a rejection from an agent nearly 2 years after I queried her. I had not only signed with an agent, but I actually already had a book deal. This agent was very contrite and apologetic in her response, but some folks just aren't on top of things. And honestly, my agent's prompt response was one of the reasons I ultimately ended up signing with her when I ended up getting a few offers of representation. I completely respect how much work is on an agent's plate, and their clients and the contracts they're managing, all of that comes first over querying, absolutely. But I can't help feeling that if they can't communicate at all with potential clients, it doesn't bode well for good communication if you end up signing with them. Look, obviously there are fantastic, super successful agents out there who have a no responses and no policy, or who go very slowly through their queries, and I'm not saying that those agents don't exist, but if I'm being honest, there's also a lot of agents who are super communicative with their highly successful clients and not so communicative with their mid-list clients, and I am definitely a mid-list client. I don't want to get put on the back burner. And in the 10 years I've been with Sarah, I have never waited more than 24 hours for her to respond to an email from me. Usually it's just a couple of hours, and she usually takes 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 4 at max, to get notes to me on a manuscript. She prioritizes communication, quick communication, and that shows in how she responds to her query because her response rate is pretty rapid. There's just so much waiting around in publishing for us authors already. I never wanted to be with an agent that would add to that, you know? All of that is just to say, I'm not a big fan of the whole no response is a no thing. Okay, all of that being said, COVID has obviously changed the landscape here for a while. Querying and submission is just gonna be slower. Acquisitions are gonna be slower. I had a book go to acquisitions at Scholastic in March when all of the lockdown stuff was starting, and the editor there told me that they were entering into like a staggered work schedule thing where certain team members would work for 2 weeks and then other team members would work for 2 weeks, and you can see how this would greatly slow everything down, and it's completely understandable. So getting an offer on that book took twice as long as it did compared to the first book that I sold to them. I'm sure at other houses right now, as COVID is just continuing to spiral out of control, similar situations are happening. So all that to say, if you haven't heard from an agent yet, or you haven't heard from an editor yet, it's been weeks, it's been months, I don't think that's the red flag that maybe I would have said it was a year ago or 5 years ago. It's just different now, and alas, we all have to be a little more patient. The next question comes from Shantae. How important do you think it is for an author to have a social media presence? Can you be successful as an author if you hate social media and don't want any part of it? Shantae, we are in the same boat. I actually had a writing vlog last week and I will link to it up here. But yeah, the short version is yes, you can absolutely be successful without social media. I hate social media. I left Facebook in 2014 and I never regretted it. And honestly, considering what is going on with that platform today, right now, I think everyone would be better off if they just left it. I left Twitter in 2016 and I have no regrets there either. Social media can be an amazing thing for communication, and certainly a lot of movements that are so important have caught on and raised awareness for certain issues, and that wouldn't have happened without social media. So I'm not saying social media is just a terrible thing that we need to do away with altogether, but the way the biggest platforms exist right now, they do my personal life more harm than good. So I personal call, it's up to the individual. Now in 2018, I gave into some very light arm twisting from one of my publishers and I joined Instagram just so I would have at least one place online, this was before I had a YouTube channel, where readers could potentially find me. I think Bookstagram is really pretty to look at. I follow a lot of dog accounts and that's super fun, but even Instagram is just not my thing. Overall, I don't enjoy being on there. I don't like scrolling through posts, trying to come up with ideas of photos to post, and I'm not much of a photographer, and then coming up with the captions to go along with them and all the hashtags. It's just a chore that I do not enjoy. You can actually scroll back through my Instagram feed and see where after I joined YouTube, I kind of tried to temporarily reinvent my Instagram to promote my YouTube channel. I was trying to just like think of it as an extension of this channel, and even that just didn't work. It lasted for a couple weeks and then I was like, ugh. My overall thoughts on social media, and I really think it's important that I make it clear here that I'm talking about for traditionally published authors, because indie publishing is a whole different game, and social media and the role it plays in indie publishing is a whole different game. But for traditional publishing, I honestly don't think that in the long run, in most cases, having a ton of followers or a big platform is ultimately going to help sell your books. To be blunt about it, in most cases, traditionally published authors with large platforms, it's going to be one of two things. The author became successful because their publisher gave them a great marketing campaign and their book sold and people flocked to their social media accounts and followed them there. Or someone grew a social media following and then either was approached by a publisher to write a book, or they had grown the social media following because they knew they wanted to try to publish the book, and to the publisher, their big platform and all of their followers seemed like it could make a difference in their sales. Like, oh, this person already has an audience, even though they haven't published a book yet. And that is not always successful. I would say that more often than not, it's not successful. You can be great at social media and it doesn't mean your books are going to connect with your audience. Do you remember this headline? Instagrammer with 2 million followers can't sell 36 t-shirts. Followers aren't necessarily consumers. I know people like to say things like, oh, if I have 10,000 followers and only 10% of them buy my book, then... But here's the thing, only 10%? No, 10% is huge. When you have a social media account, you are offering free content. People are consuming your free content. It doesn't mean that they're going to want to pay for your content or your products. It's just not a guaranteed audience. And I know, again, in indie publishing, this does work, but the way they approach it, it's just a completely different game. It's not the same as traditional publishing at all. There are indie authors out there with fantastic careers selling tons of books, and the work they put into growing their social media following is directly tied into that, and that's amazing. It just doesn't work that way in traditional publishing. The books in traditional publishing are more expensive, the way they are purchased is different, and just consumerism they're two different ecosystems. Anyway, TLDR, I have not seen anything personally to convince me that as a traditionally published author, having a large social media platform is going to move the needle on my book sales at all. And I think it's a better use of your time and effort to work on writing more books. Also, Mark Zuckerberg sucks. Next question comes from Nathalie. I found it very interesting when you talked about marketing to middle grade on the panel the other day. I would love more about that. For example, what do you actually say and do on school visits? What other marketing tools do you recommend? I love talking about middle grade and school visits, guys. So I have a few different school visit presentations, but no matter what angle I take, ultimately it's all about the process of writing and publishing. Kids love the sort of behind the scenes look at being an author, and teachers love that it demonstrates and shows to kids that writing is not an act, it's a process. I always have a slideshow. You want to have lots of visuals that show things like edit letters and examples of how I revised certain sections of my book based on recommendations from my editors, samples of different types of edits. Sometimes, if I can, I even bring in physical copies of all the manuscripts at the different stages of the process. I'll show them the cover illustration process and how we started with a sketch of an idea and how that goes through. But ultimately, the point I really try to drive home is that writing is rewriting. It's a process. I remember one moment I had in a school visit years ago where I showed up on the slideshow. I had a page from my novel. It was Spell and Spindle, and it was a page that my editor, who liked to write by hand, had taken her pen and made all kinds of notes all on the page. In the margins, there were crossouts, all this stuff. And I asked the kids, how many of you have ever written an essay that you thought was pretty good and you gave it to your teacher, and when they gave it back to you, it looked like that? And of course, every kid in the auditorium raised their hands. And I said, okay, now how did that make you feel? And this one kid goes, stupid. And the whole auditorium went kind of hushed. And I just really felt for that kid, because I think most of the kids in the auditorium were in agreement that made them feel stupid. And I said, yeah, that's how I feel too sometimes when I first get an edit letter. I put all this work into writing a book, and I think it's a pretty good book. And then I get it back from my editor, and it's just covered in red marks and all these, here's what doesn't work, here's this, here's all these different suggestions, and I feel really beat down, and yeah, I feel stupid. But that feeling doesn't last long, because when I really start thinking about my editor's suggestions and imagining what the next version of the book could look like and how much better it could be, I realize that my editor isn't saying my book sucks. My editor is saying, hey, you wrote a good book and now we're going to make it a great book. And that is what teachers are telling you. I always make sure to make this point. Again, whatever my presentation is about, I always drive that home in every school visit, because I understand that kids feel stupid when they get corrected, and I really want them to know that it doesn't mean their writing is bad. It just means it could be better. Another thing I do, and I always save this for the end of the presentation, it's always a big hit, is I will share with them 1-star reviews of books they love, but I won't tell them which book it is. I'll just read the 1-star review first and then be like, and that review was about Harry Potter or Percy Jackson or Wonder, and they freak out because they cherish these books and they cannot fathom that anyone out there thinks they're terrible. And the point there is, of course, is that like no matter how great of a book you write, there's always going to be criticism. There's always going to be people out there who don't like it, and that is no reason not to keep writing. As for marketing tools, my opinion is that if you have limited resources to spend on your own marketing, because that can get super expensive, you're far better off looking for ways to interact with readers like face-to-face than you are spending time with social media campaigns, blog tours, trying to get noticed by BookTube, things like that. I'm still talking about middle grade here, but honestly, I think FaceTime with readers is more valuable than anything else in marketing, no matter what age group you're writing to. And the thing is, while COVID is currently making in-person school visits pretty much impossible, the fact that schools have been utilizing Zoom and Skype now is amazing, because that makes it so much easier for you to set up virtual school visits because the technology is already there and they're already familiar with it. And if the idea intimidates you, remember, you don't have to do like a big presentation for like the entire 6th grade or anything like that. Do a small group. Lots of schools have book clubs. I'm personally going to try setting up a virtual book club tour when my next middle grade book comes out in April. You can also just meet with a class for half an hour and do a Q&A. No big presentation, just an informal chat. The point is, when a kid interacts with you, like you face to face, that makes an impression that no Instagram post or BookTube video or anything else could ever reach. Okay, next question is from Cabasso. Hey, is it true that a third-person present tense YA fantasy manuscript is dead on arrival? I actually had not heard this. Is there a video going around about this that I'm unaware of? If there is, please link it down below so I can check this out. I would definitely say no. I'm trying to think of a specific, like an example of a YA fantasy that's third-person present to prove my point. And while I'm sure there are some out there, nothing's coming to mind. Everything that I'm thinking of is first person present or third person past. But again, tons of books are third person present. I'm reading The Night Circus. I'm rereading The Night Circus right now. Third person present fantasy. It can totally work. I definitely don't think it's something that would cause an editor to reject it on sight. I mean, if it's written well, then there you go. I will say that the reason more fantasies are written in past tense and more dystopians and horrors are written in present tense is because past tense gives you that feeling of inevitability, of destiny that's part of fantasy as a genre. And present tense can be more urgent, a little more tense, and even destabilizing, and that can really add a lot to dystopian and horror. But that doesn't mean that you can't write a horror novel or a dystopian novel in past tense, or, you know, a fantasy in present tense, obviously. If anyone has thoughts on this, or again, if there's a video that I missed about this, please let me know below. Next question comes from Kanashi. How can you bang out several books in a month and still manage to get a great story from it? Thinking about how tough this nano deadline I imposed on myself to zero draft 3 books, and realizing that as hard as it is for me, you managed to do that and more with all the ghostwriting and other projects you do. Zero draft 3 books in a month is a hell of a goal. Okay, so I think this is a 2-part answer. Part 1 is that honestly, I am rarely able to draft 2 or more books in a month. It does happen occasionally, and honestly, it's tough on me when it does, but I'm usually able to stagger my schedule so that every month I've got something I'm outlining, something I'm drafting, something I'm revising, and something in copy edits. Everything's at different stages in the process, and that makes it easier for me to move from one project to the next. I don't want to give the impression that I write 3 pretty clean books a month. I do not do that. The other thing is that while I've vlogged about different tips and hacks that I've tried and experimented with that'll help me write faster, really, I've just been doing it for a long time. It's a muscle that I've been working out for years. You've probably heard writers say, and I was in this boat too at one point years ago, that when they think that if they have the whole day to write, they'll get so much more written. But they learn when they leave their full-time job and either go part-time or they just quit their job altogether and they think they can just write all day and they'll get all this done, that their word count daily doesn't change. In other words, if somebody has a job where they work from 9 to 5 and they were coming home every night and writing about 1,500 words, when they have the whole day to write, they're still writing 1,500 words, maybe a little bit more, but certainly not like 5,000 words. And sometimes the conclusions that are drawn from this are basically that, oh, well, I have a creative well and it's limited, and you know, this is all I can write in one day and it doesn't matter how much time I have, and then I just have to wait for the well to refill. Okay, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that that is really limiting yourself. Certainly the creative well does need to be refilled, but you can always dig your creative well a little bit deeper. If you've been writing 1,500 words a day and you suddenly think that just because you have 8 hours instead of 2 hours, you're going to turn out 5,000 or 6,000 words a day, well, that's not true. That's like saying, oh, well, I've been spending an hour at the gym every day, but starting tomorrow, I'm gonna spend 6 hours at the gym, so that means that I'll be able to run 10 miles on the treadmill and bench press 200 pounds. No, of course you can't do that. But you can start training yourself to get there. If you want to be able to run 10 miles, you don't just try to run 10 miles every day until you collapse. That's a good way to get hurt. You start by running a mile or two or whatever you're comfortable with every day, and then just pushing yourself a little bit more every week. It's the same with writing, or to go back to the creative well metaphor, just dig a little more, a little inch, another inch every day. Eventually, yes, I think if you want to, you can write 6 to 7 hours a day. Sometimes I think this maybe falls into the whole argument against writer's block too. Like, was it Neil Gaiman or somebody who said, you know, architects don't get architect's block? Like, I understand that sometimes creatively you feel stuck, but the truth is, as human beings, we can train ourselves to have a lot of stamina when it comes to creative work and when it comes to technical work. Surgeons who are capable of operating on someone's brain for 5 to 6 hours, probably the most high stakes, intense, pressure job I can imagine, then certainly we can train ourselves to write fiction for 6 hours a day, right? Don't limit yourself. You can do it. You just need to train yourself and get there. Oh, and the part two, the last thing that I wanted to point out is that a lot of the books I write are ghostwriting projects, which means that I'm collaborating with someone else. My clients are super involved, especially when we're in the development and outlining phase. So in that aspect, it's a lot more like co-authoring. I'm sharing the burden. So it's not just me writing my own book. There's somebody that is a sounding board that's there to give me ideas and help me when I'm feeling stuck, you know? So the ghostwriting thing, I think it's really important to keep in mind because that makes up a big percentage of the number of books I write every year. Okay, next question. This is a long one and really interesting. This one comes from Jay Riley. As we know, everyone's experiences are different. However, as a teacher's aide for 4th grade who handles the reading logs, I've seen the same trend every year, which is saddening to me. Advanced reading 9-year-olds, oddly enough, mostly the advanced girls at that age, being disenfranchised with reading. They're reading at an upper middle grade level or higher, so books the majority of their peers are reading while they transition from chapter books don't appeal to them. Diary of a Wimpy Kid and Dork Diaries, for example. Though they've done wonders in bridging the gap between chapter books and middle grade for the standard level students I've had. But to the same token, as these advanced readers are so much younger than the protagonists in upper middle grade or certain young adult books, depending on subjects and child, they don't connect with the books and don't get past a few chapters. They essentially start giving up on reading. I find the belief that kids always want to read about older kids is disheartening at best and damaging at worst. I'd like to be able to bridge that gap and have my middle grade novels help with this issue with more complex storytelling and concepts of upper middle grade while still featuring the younger protagonist with whom these kids can identify. My side characters are mostly a year or two older, or are the adults in her life, but my main character is specifically starting 4th grade, just as these students are. Do you have any suggestions on how to convince this to an agent given the current older character cell beliefs without the query letter seeming like an insult towards middle grade? I'm not trying to insult anything. All I've ever really enjoyed all my life is middle grade. I'm just trying to bridge a market desperate for someone to recognize them? This is such an interesting question. I've done school visits with gifted and talented middle school, like 7th grade, 8th grade classes before, and I've found that a lot of them are reading adult novels already, which in most cases they're pursuing these on their own. It's obviously not part of their classroom reading or their reading lists. But I do see what you're saying about how the whole belief that kids read up can be overly simplistic and even harmful, yeah. That said, I do think there's already a lot of middle grade novels out there that are exceptions to this rule. I mean, I mentioned Wonder by R.J. Palacio earlier. That book is a massive phenomenon. The character is starting 5th grade, elementary school, but the book is on middle school reading lists. It's beloved by 6th graders, 7th graders, 8th graders. That's just one example, and I know while it doesn't speak specifically to the type of book you're talking about, I do think it contradicts the readers read up rule pretty clearly. I think this is part of a larger marketing problem where things like this are seen as truths by gatekeepers and booksellers, and it means that it's harder for books that contradict these beliefs to break out. Another example that comes to mind is boys don't read books about girls. In the year of our Lord 2020, this is still a thing I hear from librarians and from booksellers, and it's just patently untrue. What is true is that when we, as adults, teach young boys through our words directly or just through our actions that they should feel ashamed for reading about girls, then yes, they will internalize that. But when kids are free to choose to read whatever they want to read, all of these weird beliefs that are out there are just revealed to be BS. Kids will read about kids their age, they'll read about older kids, they'll read about adults, they'll read about younger kids, they'll read about kids of their gender and of not, they'll read about kids who are their race and who are not, they'll read about kids with their own sexuality and who aren't. Sometimes they're drawn to characters who represent themselves, and sometimes they're drawn to characters who have had a completely different life experience. And it's really important that all of those stories are out there for kids to find the book that they want to read. The most ideal thing always is for kids to have access to as many different types of stories as possible. Enough of that soapbox. As far as querying your book goes, the best advice I can give you is to let your pitch, your query, and your manuscript speak for itself. I don't think it's a good idea to try and convince an agent that your book will shatter any misconceptions, especially in that initial query letter that's going to be their first point of contact with you. And look, it's not to say your book won't shatter misconceptions. I mean, it very well might. It's just that I can't think of a way to say it that wouldn't be off-putting to the agent, because I think ultimately it's just a proof is in the pudding kind of thing. But that said, I do think one thing you could do in your query is to use an older novel as a comp. Something that fits the themes of your book, and then just say it's for younger readers. You know, like Everything for middle grade, or Perks of Being a Wallflower for middle grade. Whatever you think a good comp might be. But choosing a YA comp and saying it's for middle grade instead of comparing it to another middle grade book, I think that sends the message that this book that you're querying is for more mature, more advanced, younger readers without you directly saying it. I really hope that was helpful, guys. If you liked this video, please don't forget to hit that like button. And like I said, if I didn't answer your question, that means I am saving it for a writing workshop video that will be coming up soon. So please keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, thanks for watching. I hope you guys are having a great week, and I'll see you on Friday with another vlog. Bye.